Chapter 1. The Friday they decided I was done. I was fired the Friday before Christmas, escorted out quietly while the office celebrated. Then weeks later, I watched my name get blamed for everything that went wrong after I left, and I said nothing, because what they did not know was that while they were rewriting my past, I was already holding the future of the company in my hands. My name is Ellie Whitmore, and this is not a story about revenge driven by anger. It is about what happens when silence, patience, and preparation collide at the exact wrong moment for the people who underestimated you. I knew something was wrong the moment the calendar invite landed in my inbox. It was 3:30 on a Friday in mid-December, the last working Friday before Christmas, and the subject line was simply Quick Sync. No agenda, no context. The meeting room listed was a small internal conference room on the 12th floor, not the executive suite where I usually spent my afternoons. I had been with Northlake Systems for almost a decade, long enough to recognize when silence meant decisions had already been made. Outside my office, the floor hummed with holiday energy. Someone had put a Santa hat on the copy machine. Green garland hung crooked along the glass walls. Laughter floated from the break room where the marketing team had started their unofficial early exit. The city beyond the windows was already turning blue with winter dusk, Chicago doing what it always did in December, pretending it was festive while quietly freezing you out. I closed my laptop and picked up my notebook, out of habit more than necessity. When I walked down the hall, I noticed that people avoided my eyes. That was the first real confirmation. People always knew before you did. Inside the small conference room sat Andrew Cole, our CEO, and Linda Harris from HR. Andrew was 44, sharp suit, carefully neutral expression. Linda was in her late 50s, immaculate as always, a folder already placed in front of her, papers aligned with surgical precision. They both stood when I entered, too formal, too rehearsed. I sat down and waited. Years of running operations had taught me that the person who spoke first usually had less power. Andrew thanked me for making the time. Linda nodded and began speaking almost immediately, her voice calm and practiced. She said the company was entering a new phase. She said the board had conducted a strategic review. She said there would be an organizational restructuring. I listened without interrupting, counting the familiar phrases as they landed. Leadership culture shift, new energy, alignment for the future. She said my role was being eliminated effective immediately. She said the decision was not a reflection of my performance. Andrew did not look at me while she spoke. When he finally did, he leaned back slightly in his chair and added that this was about evolution, that Northlake needed leaders who could adapt faster, who were less hands-on, who could empower without controlling. He said my strengths had been invaluable in the past, especially during the pandemic years, but the company needed something different now. I had built their operational backbone from the ground up. I had slept on the office couch in 2020 when supply chains collapsed and clients threatened to walk. I had trained half the leadership team, including the man who would now step into my role. I had signed off on budgets that saved millions without cutting a single frontline job. None of that made it into the room. Linda slid a document toward me. Severance details, compliance language, everything according to policy. She said all access would be revoked by end of day. She said IT had already been notified. I asked one question, my voice steady to my own surprise. I asked if there had been any warning signs, any feedback I had missed. Andrew said this was not about mistakes. He said sometimes growth required difficult choices. He said he hoped I would understand. Linda reached for my badge. Her hand did not shake. When the laptop in front of me went dark, locked remotely while I was still sitting there, something inside my chest tightened. Not anger, not panic, just a clean, sharp awareness of finality. Andrew stood and extended his hand. He said he appreciated everything I had done for the company. He said he wished me the best. Then he smiled, thin and careful, and said, "Merry Christmas." That was the moment it cut. not because of the words, but because of how easily they were delivered, like punctuation at the end of a sentence they had already finished writing. I handed over my badge and stood. I did not argue. I did not ask for more time. I did not remind them of my track record. I realized in that moment that they had already decided who I was in this story, and nothing I said would change their version. The walk back to my office felt longer than usual. My access card no longer worked, so a junior manager had to let me in, his face flushed with embarrassment. I packed my personal items into a single box: a framed photo from a charity run, a mug from a client conference, a notebook filled with ideas that would never be mine to implement here. As I stepped into the elevator, the doors closed on a burst of laughter from the break room. Someone had turned the music up. Jingle bells echoed down the hall. In the parking garage, the cold hit hard. I sat in my car for a moment before turning the key. The radio came on automatically, a soft Christmas song about coming home. I turned it off. I did not cry. I did not scream. What I felt instead was a strange, unsettling calm, the kind that comes when a door slams so cleanly that it leaves no splinters behind. They thought they had removed me from the equation. They thought this was the end of my involvement, the quiet disposal of a problem that no longer fit their narrative. As I pulled out into traffic, the office tower shrinking in my rearview mirror, one thought settled in with absolute clarity. This was not the end. It was only the moment they stopped watching. Chapter 2: What They Never Saw Me Building. What followed did not begin that night in the parking garage. It had started years earlier, quietly, when no one thought I was looking anywhere but straight ahead. In early 2021, long before the word restructuring ever brushed my name, Henry Wallace asked me to lunch. Henry was a senior board member, early 60s, the kind of man who spoke softly and listened longer than most. We met at a small bistro near the river, the kind executives liked because no one paid attention to who sat in the corner booths. He told me a private equity firm was building a portfolio in enterprise technology, conservative capital, long horizon, allergic to chaos. They needed someone who understood operations, not theory, someone who had been inside the machinery when it overheated. He asked if I would advise them. At first, I said no. My plate was full. Northlake Systems was still recovering from the pandemic years, and I had no interest in noonlighting. Henry nodded, unfazed. He said, "Think about it." He said the managing partner respected discretion more than loyalty theater. That name came later, Naomi Keller. I agreed to one introductory call, then another. Naomi was 55, precise without being cold. She did not flatter. She asked how I handled failure, not success. She asked what systems broke first under pressure. She listened when I said that leadership rot rarely announced itself loudly. By mid-2021, I was formally advising the firm on operational diligence for mid-market B2B technology companies. I reviewed org charts, stress-tested cash flow assumptions, flagged cultural risks no spreadsheet ever captured. It was clean work, separate from my day job, or so I thought. The shift happened the moment I saw a familiar name cross my screen: Northlake Systems. I stared at the dossier longer than I should have. Revenue growth projections, leadership bios, risk factors written in language I recognized because I had approved some of it myself. I called Naomi that afternoon and told her we needed to talk. We met in her office 2 days later. I disclosed everything: my role, my title, my access. I told her I would recuse myself immediately if they moved forward. I told her I would walk away from the advisory role if there was even the appearance of conflict. She listened, hands folded, expression unreadable. Then she asked the question that mattered: are you protecting them right now, or are you protecting the truth? I did not answer right away, because the honest answer was both, and that was the problem. Over the next month, the air between us shifted. Naomi became sharper. Her team pushed harder on diligence questions. There were moments I could feel their suspicion, wondering whether my assessments were too generous, too tempered. At one point, the firm paused the entire process. Legal flagged risk. Too close, too complicated. Walking away would be easier. That was the moment I called my brother. Thomas Whitmore had been a corporate attorney for 30 decades. He did not sugarcoat. When I laid it all out, he told me the truth. If I wanted to stay involved, the structure had to be airtight. No personal upside, no direct ownership, no ambiguity. Rachel Kim joined the conversation soon after. She was the firm's counsel, younger than me but razor sharp. She rebuilt the walls I thought already existed. She wrote fire breaks into the operating agreement, disclosures so explicit they bordered on uncomfortable. She removed my name from anything that could be interpreted as control. It meant something else, too. If the investment went bad, if Northlake collapsed under scrutiny, I would not be able to intervene. I would not be able to save it. I would lose my role there and my reputation with the firm in one clean sweep. I accepted those terms anyway. The day I signed the final advisory amendment, Naomi looked at me across the table and said quietly that trust was expensive. I nodded. I knew the price. By late 2022, the firm moved forward, not aggressively, patiently. Minority position at first, preferred shares structured for protection, not dominance. All of it invisible to anyone not reading the fine print. I stayed in my COO role. I did not change my behavior. I did not warn anyone. I watched. And what I saw confirmed every concern I had tried to raise internally. Decisions rushed for optics, risk ignored when slowing momentum, a growing discomfort with my insistence on process, on accountability, on saying no. Andrew grew distant. Lucas grew louder. The room shifted around me in ways I could feel but not stop. By the time December 2023 arrived, the firm had options. I did not, or at least that was how it looked. The night I was fired, after the garage and the silence and the long drive home, I opened my laptop. Not the work one, the personal one I kept for legal documents and things I did not share. I pulled up the termination email, subject line, formal notice, language clean, severance outlined nice and neat at the bottom. I read it once, then again, not for the insult, for the timing. I closed the file, shut the laptop, and sat in the dark living room while the Christmas lights outside my window blinked in their relentless cheer. I felt nothing, no urge to respond, no desire to defend myself. They had stopped watching, and everything that came next depended on that.
Chapter 3. When silence started costing them. The shift was subtle at first, the kind you only notice if you know where the seams are. By the first week of January, Lucas Reed was announced as interim COO. The email came early Monday morning, upbeat and optimistic, full of language about agility and momentum. I read it on my phone while making coffee, the steam curling up and disappearing before I could taste it. Lucas had potential. He also had impatience. He believed speed was the same thing as leadership. Within days, he began trimming what he called excess operational weight. Project managers reassigned. Vendor contracts paused. 2 senior coordinators let go with polite thank you emails and calendar invites that vanished as soon as the meetings ended. From the outside, it looked decisive. From the inside, it was destabilizing. The first real crack came 3 weeks later. A long-term enterprise client pulled out of a rollout after a missed deployment deadline triggered penalty clauses. It was the kind of failure we had built safeguards against years earlier, the kind that only happened when no one was watching the details. I heard about it from Olivia Grant. She called me late one evening, her voice low, hesitant. "I should not be telling you this," she said, "but things are not okay." I did not interrupt. I had learned that when someone finally spoke, they needed space. Lucas froze in the escalation meeting, she continued. He kept asking for updates instead of decisions. Andrew stepped in, but it was already too late. Andrew Cole, CEO, the man who had smiled at me and wished me Merry Christmas. Over the next few weeks, the story repeated itself in different forms: missed handoffs, conflicting directives, teams waiting for approvals that never came, the kind of slow bleed that does not make headlines but drains confidence. Then came the email. It was sent company-wide on a Thursday morning. Subject line, "Looking forward." I did not need to see it to know what it would say. Olivia forwarded it anyway. Andrew wrote about learning from the past, about moving beyond legacy leadership decisions, about the importance of adaptability in a changing market. He never used my name. He did not have to. Olivia called again, angry this time. "Everyone knows he is talking about you," she said. "People are whispering in the halls." I felt something tighten then, not because of the blame, but because of how casually it was assigned, as if years of infrastructure and crisis management could be reduced to an inconvenience they had outgrown. A week later, Andrew hosted a town hall. Olivia watched from the back of the room and told me what happened afterward, how Andrew stood under the bright lights, hands open, voice calm, how he spoke about evolution and letting go, how he said the company needed to move on from the past. Someone asked what went wrong with the client, Olivia said. The organization was still shaking off old habits. That was the first time I felt truly insulted. Not because of my ego, because of the truth. I had fought for those habits, the redundancy, the checks, the discipline that kept people employed and clients protected. Watching them be recast as obstacles hurt more than the firing itself. And yet I did nothing. Silence was not weakness, it was restraint. By early February, Naomi Keller called. Her tone was measured, but I heard the shift immediately. "We are activating the audit," she said. "Full scope, operational and financial." I closed my eyes and leaned back in my chair. "It's time," she added. "The data supports it." The irony did not escape me. The reports Andrew was now dismissing as over-engineered were the same ones being used as legal anchors, the same risk assessments, the same internal warnings. Naomi paused before continuing. "I need you to be prepared," she said. "This will not be quiet." I told her I understood. After the call, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the winter light as it filtered through the window. There was no satisfaction in what was unfolding, only a dull ache. I thought of the people still inside, of Olivia, of teams trying to hold things together while leadership searched for someone to blame. Later that afternoon, an email arrived addressed to me by name. "Special shareholder meeting, attendance requested." I read it once, then again. The invitation was formal, polite, precise. It named me not as a former executive, but as a representative of the firm. I closed my laptop and stood by the window as traffic moved slowly below. Snow had begun to fall, soft and steady, covering the city in a temporary absolution. I had not planned this moment. I had prepared for it. There was a difference, and soon they would understand that silence, once ignored, had become expensive.
Chapter 4. The Room Where Power Changed Hands. The invitation instructed everyone to arrive 15 minutes early. That alone told me this meeting would not be routine. The boardroom sat on the 24th floor, all glass and polished stone, designed to impress and intimidate in equal measure. I arrived quietly, dressed simply, no badge, no nameplate, just another representative from a firm most of them still thought of as distant capital. Andrew Cole was already there, standing near the head of the table, jacket off, sleeves rolled, projecting confidence he no longer fully owned. Maggie Harris sat a few seats down, papers stacked neatly in front of her, eyes scanning the room as people filtered in. Lucas Reed hovered near the screen, laptop open, hands restless. No one acknowledged me at first. That was intentional. It gave me time to observe. When the meeting was called to order, the usual formalities passed quickly. Financial overview, market conditions, a brief nod to recent challenges, framed as temporary turbulence. Then the screen changed. The shareholder slide appeared, listing ownership percentages in clean rows, names, entities, voting rights. The room shifted. I watched Andrew's posture stiffen as he leaned forward, eyes narrowing. The firm Naomi Keller represented sat at the top, its stake now unmistakably dominant. Not a suggestion, control. Andrew cleared his throat. "This is new," he said. "This level of concentration raises questions." Naomi responded calmly from across the table. "We have disclosed every acquisition in accordance with regulatory requirements." Andrew's jaw tightened. "I would like to understand the strategic intent here," he said, "because this feels less like investment and more like intervention." Maggie spoke next, voice precise. "Any change in governance must respect existing employment agreements and non-disclosure obligations." The air grew dense. This was the pushback I had expected, the last stand of procedure and threat. Andrew turned his attention fully to Naomi. "We have protections in place," he said. "Any attempt to influence leadership decisions could trigger legal consequences." Rachel Kim did not raise her voice when she answered. "All shareholder rights exercised by this firm fall squarely within the framework approved by this board," she said. "There is no breach." Andrew leaned back, folding his arms. "I am prepared to defend this company," he said, "including through litigation if necessary." Silence followed, not awkward, intentional. Then I spoke. "I believe what Andrew is asking," I said evenly, "is whether this firm understands what it is stepping into." Heads turned. Recognition flickered, slow and stunned. Andrew stared at me as if the room had shifted beneath his feet. "Ellie," he said, recovering quickly, "I was not aware you would be attending. I am here in a professional capacity, as disclosed." Maggie's lips pressed together. Lucas looked down at his hands. "I did not mention December. I did not mention the small conference room or the locked laptop. There was no need." "I want to talk about intent," I continued, "not as a former executive, but as someone who understands the infrastructure of this organization." I spoke about sustainability, about the cost of speed without discipline, about systems that protect people when leadership falters. I did not accuse, I described. Rachel placed a document on the table and slid it toward the center. "These are the findings from the preliminary audit. They highlight governance risks tied directly to recent leadership decisions." Andrew did not touch the paper. Maggie did. Her eyes moved quickly as she scanned the pages. Her composure shifted just slightly. "This process," she said carefully, "needs to be handled with care." "That is exactly why we are here," Naomi replied. Andrew exhaled sharply. "What are you proposing?" he asked. Naomi looked at me. I met his gaze. "A reset," I said evenly. "Temporary leadership realignment, oversight, accountability." Lucas looked up, panic barely concealed. Andrew shook his head. "You cannot seriously believe," he began. The vote interrupted him. Henry Wallace spoke then, his voice steady. "The numbers are clear," he said. "We are not debating feelings. We are addressing risk." One by one, hands went up. Andrew's did not. When the motion passed, the room fell quiet. Maggie closed her folder. Andrew stood slowly, eyes fixed on the table. "This is not how this was supposed to go." "No," I replied. "It rarely is." By the time the meeting adjourned, titles had shifted. Authority had moved, not loudly, decisively. By the time I left the room, I did not look back. In the elevator, alone, I felt the tension release from my shoulders in a long, silent breath. There was no triumph, only relief. The kind that comes when something misaligned finally settles into place. Chapter 5. After Christmas, After Silence. Monday morning felt different, not because the building had changed, but because the people inside it had. I arrived early, before the elevators filled, before the lobby smelled like burnt coffee and anxious cologne. The security guard at the desk hesitated when he saw me, then straightened and offered a careful smile. "Good morning, Miss Whitmore," he said. No one had called me that in this building for months. I nodded and kept walking. I did not slow down to savor it. I had learned the hard way that power was not a moment, it was maintenance. The new badge in my hand was plain, temporary, issued under my name as interim chair. It opened doors without drama. The click of the reader sounded the same as it always had, but the difference was that now no one could lock it from a distance because they felt like it. The first meeting of the day was not about revenge, it was about triage. Rachel Kim and Naomi Keller were already in a small conference room, laptops open, papers spread out, the kind of organized chaos that meant real work was about to begin. Henry Wallace joined a few minutes later, bringing that same quiet steadiness that had kept him on the board through decades of storms. Naomi looked up when I entered. "We need to stabilize operations before we touch anything else," she said. "I know. And we do it without making people feel hunted." Rachel slid a list across the table. "These roles are critical," she said. "If we lose them, the business suffers." I scanned the names: engineers, implementation leads, client success managers, people who kept promises alive after executives stopped paying attention. "That is who we protect," I said. When the conversation turned to leadership, the room did not get dramatic, it got precise. Daniel Cole was placed on administrative leave pending the full audit. Lucas Reed was removed from interim COO duties immediately. Maggie Harris remained in place only long enough to coordinate an orderly transition, with oversight and clear boundaries. Rachel was careful with her language. "We do this by the book," she said. "No shortcuts, no humiliation. Everything documented, everything consistent." Naomi nodded. "Clean separation," she said, "not a public spectacle." I felt the weight of that in my chest. It would have been easy to make it personal. It would have been satisfying for a moment to watch Daniel squirm in the same cold light he had used on me. But satisfaction was not the point. The point was correction. By lunchtime, I walked through the operations floor. People stood when I approached, then caught themselves. Nervous smiles, curious eyes, a few whispered greetings. I saw relief in some faces, fear in others. Change always did that. It made everyone wonder who would be next. I stopped at a cluster of desks where a project team had been quietly drowning under impossible deadlines. I asked one simple question. "What do you need to do your job without burning out?" I said. A woman with tired eyes blinked at me. "Clear priorities and someone who answers emails." The small laugh that followed was not joy, it was recognition. That afternoon, Olivia Grant appeared at my door. She looked like she had not slept in days. Her hair was pulled back, her hands clenched around a folder as if it was the only thing keeping her steady. "I did not know if I should come," she said. "You should," I replied. She stepped in slowly. "I never forwarded anything to hurt anyone," she said. "I just did not want you to be blamed for things you did not do." "I know," I said. Her shoulders dropped, the first sign of relief. "I'm not looking for loyalty," I continued. "I'm looking for integrity. Those are different." She nodded, eyes shining, but she did not cry. I offered her a seat and asked what she wanted, not what she feared. She hesitated. "I want to do work that matters, not just manage calendars while people lie in conference rooms." "Then you're going to be busy," I replied. 2 days later, Olivia joined the new Strategy and Operations Task Force, not as a reward for standing by me, but because she had proven something rare. She saw truth when it was inconvenient. She held on to it anyway. The week moved fast. Meetings, documents, calls with clients to reassure them we were stable, quiet decisions that kept paychecks coming and contracts intact. Daniel did not disappear politely. He requested a meeting. Rachel advised against it. Naomi supported her. Henry raised his eyebrows as if to say the man didn't deserve your time. I took it anyway, with Rachel present. Daniel sat across from me in a small room that smelled like lemon cleaner. He looked tired, older than 44 suddenly, the kind of tired that came when the narrative collapsed. "I didn't think it would come to this," he said. "That's the problem. You didn't think." He swallowed. "You were too rigid," he said, grasping for something familiar. "You made people feel controlled." I did not raise my voice. "I made the company safe," I said. "You wanted it to look impressive." Rachel placed a document on the table and slid it toward him. Your separation agreement, voluntary resignation, standard terms, non-disparagement both ways. Daniel stared at it. You're not going to drag me, he asked, half question, half disbelief. I'm not going to become you, I replied. He signed. When he left, the room felt cleaner, not because he was gone, but because the lie had finally stopped breathing. On Friday, I walked into the main boardroom alone. The holiday decor was still there, faded garland, a string of Christmas lights draped along the edge of the long table. It had been left up like a joke no one wanted to admit was cruel. I unplugged the lights and began to coil them carefully, not ripping them down, not making a statement, just removing them the way you remove something that no longer belongs in the room. I placed the lights in a box and set it on the shelf in the supply closet. Not thrown away, not displayed, put away. Outside, the city was brightening into early spring. The river moved slow, people moved fast, life went on. I returned to my office, sat down, and opened my calendar. The days ahead were filled with work that would not be glamorous, rebuilding trust, reinforcing systems, making sure the people who held the company together were never treated like disposable parts again. For the first time since that Friday before Christmas, I felt my breathing settle into something steady. And if you've ever been pushed out quietly, if you've ever watched someone rewrite your value as if it was a line item they could erase, I want to ask you one thing. If you were cut out in silence, did you leave right away, or did you start preparing for your moment?